So after a tough set of losses, I'm looking to bounce back and really put my blunders behind me. So I go into this game against a player with the username Green Javelin. And I have the black pieces, and the game we played is actually very quick. They opened with e4, and I went for d6, the perk defense. We have d4, knight f6, knight c3, all very standard moves, g6, knight f3, bishop g7, and now already my opponent made a pretty significant inaccuracy with e5. It looks like a good move because it's actively attacking the knight, but I can just take the pawn. And now after we trade queens, I jump in with the knight, and now we see that this pawn is actually overextended and is soon going to be lost. And there's not much you can do to defend it. And after bishop f4, I just played knight c6, and now there's 3 attackers to white's 2 defenders. And a move like bishop b5 would be a good try, but after bishop d7 and a move like this, I can just take here. And if they were to take here, I have this intermediate move. Either way, they're going to lose a pawn. So my opponent accepted that they're losing a pawn, played h3, and now we have a mass series of trades which my opponent just played in split seconds. I recaptured, and now, again, instead of thinking, my opponent played a dumb move, knight e3, which hangs the pawn on b2, and after rook b1 and bishop c3 check, my opponent actually resigned here, being down 2 pawns. Their king is going to be out in the open now, and they have really no compensation. And if we look at the computer analysis, I played with an accuracy of 99.6%, but really this isn't saying much because all the moves that I played were very straightforward and didn't really require a lot of calculation. They were just the easiest, most straightforward moves in the position. After that quick victory, which the game was over in maybe 2 minutes, I decided to go into another game, and this time I had the white pieces, and I actually got paired against the same player, username Green Javelin. And so I opened with e4, and my opponent went for c5. We have knight f3, knight c6, a Sicilian. And after a trade, my opponent went for e5. And after knight b5, looking to jump into the square, my opponent played a6. And so we have a knight check, bishop takes, and now queen to e7, looking to trade off the queens. Although a trade here would be favorable for my opponent because now they would have 2 knights in the game, and I still haven't developed anyone really. So instead I retreated the queen. As I know this opening up until this point, I know that you have to bring the queen back. We have d6 now, knight to c3, looking to jump into the square. My opponent now brings out their knight. And now I played bishop g5, creating a pin here. Everything is good up until this point, and now my opponent played bishop e6. And this is now where I'm starting to kind of get out of my preparation. I pretty much knew what to do up until this point. It was all very straightforward for me. But now I'm starting to get a little bit stuck. And I thought for a few minutes on this move, what I could have just done is taken the knight. And if my opponent were to recapture with the pawn, now they have this awkward structure where their light squares are weak. And if they were to take with the queen, then I can actually grab this pawn. But I was very hesitant to go into this because for a lost pawn, my opponent would have quite a lot of activity. I would have had to move here and then maybe queen g5. In hindsight, it actually would have been probably okay for me, but it's a little bit risky to go into, especially since my opponent clearly knew this opening variation. And so instead I played queen to d2, which is not a great move, but it's okay. Better would have been to just play knight to d5, and after bishop takes, pawn takes, black is going to have to move the knight back, but then the knight will redeploy to d7, and it's actually okay for black. But instead I played queen e2, and now my opponent attacked the bishop, which I now took the knight. Queen takes, and again I ignored this pawn, I simply castled long. And now my opponent castled, and again here I was a little bit stuck. I didn't want to take this pawn because that would give black a lot of activity with the rooks. I just need to develop this bishop. But I didn't want to develop it to d3 because then there's a pawn in the way. And on e2, my opponent could actually take here. So I decided to play g3, which it looked good to me at the time. I was preparing f4, bishop g2. I'm going to control this diagonal, but it's actually a mistake. My opponent now dove in with knight d4, attacking the square, and I now played f4. And now my opponent plays bishop g4, and you see that the rook is actually very vulnerable, and the fact that it doesn't have a lot of space to move to is a problem. If I played something like this, my opponent could just take the bishop, and after knight takes, a move like queen to e6 attacking here, and after I move the king, then my opponent can get into the queen. It would already be a very tough position for me to play. So I decided actually to give up the rook for the bishop, give up the exchange. I played knight d5, and on queen d8, I played bishop d3. And of course, my opponent took the rook. I recaptured. And now my opponent played b5. And so at this point, I was thinking, okay, I gave up the exchange, but if I launch a pawn storm on the king side, if I just tuck my king in, I could be okay. And actually, a lot of times, I'm curious to see kind of where my opponents are rated in their other categories other than rapid. Like myself, I'm trying to build up to 2,000 or 2,100 in rapid, but my blitz rating is already up in the 2,000 range. However, sometimes my opponent's ratings are not quite as consistent as mine. And this opponent, actually, her blitz rating is only in like the 1,200 range, and her bullet rating is even lower than that. So I was already getting a little bit suspicious, like, how is a player with such a low bullet and blitz rating able to play so well and have such a high rapid rating? Something's not quite adding up. So I played here king to b1, and my opponent played their knight back to c6, and now I played h4 with the idea that I'm going to start to push these pawns forward and try to maybe break open the king, start some kind of an attack. My opponent just moved the knight back to e7 to try to trade off the knights. I played f5 now, looking to, again, storm through. And so we traded knights. And now my opponent played rook to e8, which for someone with a blitz rating of 1,200 to play this in like 2 seconds is, again, very suspicious. This is kind of a more advanced move because it's preparing to push this pawn forward and kind of cut the bishop out of the game. So I moved my bishop in front of the pawn before it could cut me off. My opponent played rook to c8. I stopped it with b3, preventing the rook from coming in. And now they just moved the rook back. So again, kind of weird how they moved the rook out of the way. Now they're moving it back. Seems a little bit non-human, this thought process. And so I played rook f1, hoping that maybe I can give up the pawn here. And like, for example, if my opponent played a slow move like a5, I could play f6. And if they took, I could already be threatening a checkmate here. But of course, they saw this and played f6. And already it's very difficult for me to break through here because my bishop is not well placed. It's blocked by my own pawns. And to launch these pawns forward is going to take some time. I played rook to g1. Again, a quick reply from my opponent, queen to b6, attacking the rook. Very difficult to attack here. I played queen to g2, looking to line the rook and the queen up with the king. If I can just push this pawn a couple times and break through, I might have a pretty strong attack. But my opponent brings their rook in. So I push the pawn. And now rook to e3, just a devilishly tricky move, laying a trap for me. If I were to play g5, they could actually take my bishop. And after queen takes, they take the rook. Now, thankfully, I saw this in the game. But for a 1,200 rated blitz player to see this so quickly in a rapid game, something's not right. So I played rook to d1, looking to get the rook out of the way of the queen. And now my opponent brought their queen in, looking to bring the rook here and trade off. Like, for example, well, the move I played in the game is bishop f3. They brought their queen in even further. And now return the bishop. I'm already kind of out of ideas. My bishop just has nowhere to go. Anywhere it goes, it's either preventing me from attacking or it's getting threatened. And so I moved it back to where it was, and now my opponent played rook to e1, looking to trade off rooks. We traded. They grabbed this pawn, all very quick moves. And I decided to just try playing a little bit further, maybe try to push these pawns. But after we traded, it becomes apparent that I just endangered my king. And again, in about 5 seconds, they found the next two moves. Queen a3 check, and after queen d3, queen to e1, with a pretty much unstoppable checkmate threat on b4, with the rook and queen connecting. Only way I can prolong it is if I give up my queen for the rook, but then queen takes bishop, and it's game over. So what frustrated me most about this loss was not just the fact that I lost. I mean, obviously I made a mistake. I need to go study that opening a little bit better. But the way in which I lost and the fact that my opponent played such quick moves, and of course I went back and looked at the analysis, and what do you know? My opponent played with an accuracy level of 99.3%, not making a single mistake or a single blunder, making excellent move after excellent move, sometimes only thinking for a few seconds. How is your rating only 1200 in Blitz if you're able to make such good decisions so quickly? Something's not right. Now, chess.com has an algorithm that's set up to catch and prevent cheaters, but of course, there's a lot of accounts on chess.com and they're not able to catch everyone immediately. So I had to actually go in and report this account, and I basically said that their ratings are not very consistent, it's very suspicious, and they played very good moves very quickly. And what do you know? Less than an hour after I submitted that complaint, I get this message saying that the account has been closed for a fair play violation. So clearly the chess.com fair play team looked at the account and agreed with my evaluation that they must have been cheating, because a 1200 rated Blitz player is just not going to find such good moves so quickly. So these two games that you saw my opponent play were their last two games in the chess.com account. Cheaters get what's coming to them. So yeah, you could say I lost to a cheater, and it's unfortunate, but I still learned something from the game. I definitely need to go back and look at that opening, as I've seen it before, but I've never really got to that point. Thankfully, because of the fair play violation, I actually did not drop down in rating points. So hopefully I can continue on moving up smoothly.